Hi, I'm Jim Junot, and this is the Junot Files. In the annals of rock and roll, there have been a lot of strange characters, but there probably hasn't been anyone as bizarre as Screamin' Jay Hawkins. Known mostly for a single record and emerging from a coffin to perform on stage, Screamin' Jay was a whirlwind performer, a lusty singer, a prolific songwriter, and a man who was a total stranger to the truth. I've Put a Spell on You, The Bizarre Life of Screamin' Jay Hawkins, a new book from author Steve Bergsman and published by Feral House Books, will be available on July 1. I talked with Bergsman about his latest book. This guy, for those of you who are not familiar with Screamin' Jay Hawkins, you will probably know the song I Put a Spell on You because recently it has been in the movie 50 Shades of Grey. And it was sung then by Annie Lennox of the Eurythmics. But now, Screamin' Jay Hawkins himself was a rather strange dude, wasn't he, Guy?
He was very interesting, you might say. I Put a Spell on You was probably one of his most normal records, and you can say that of all the weird groups that we've seen in rock and roll, starting from Kiss or Alice Cooper, or going back to the crazy world of Arthur Brown, they all owe that craziness to Screamin' Jay Hawkins, who was the first to dress up bizarrely to do his show. As a matter of fact, he's most known for coming out of a coffin to sing I Put a Spell on You.
Now, in the book, I mean, let's face it, Screamin' Jay Hawkins always gave like about five different versions of his life. And how hard was it separating the fact from the fiction?
Well, that's interesting that you say that. It's doubtful that he could utter more than 5 words without telling a fabrication. So, and it didn't matter who you were, whether you were a close friend, whether you were his wife, whether you were a journalist, whether you were somebody that did him a favor, you were going to get a story that was basically not true.
So, but how hard was it for you as the author to dig through all that and say, well, this could be true, this might not be true?
Well, I had to sort through a lot of interviews, and I got a couple of breaks, because, I found his daughter, and she was helpful to me. I found his first sister-in-law from his first marriage. I was able to pull up his military records, and then it was a lot of internet gumshoe, you might say, to track down different parts of his life. So I got as close to the truth as I think most people will find.
Now he started with a rather, I would say, a normal act with Tiny Grimes and playing in the USO tours when he was in the Army, even though he liked to say that he was seeing combat later on. But his development of his persona came over time, didn't it?
Well, there are a couple things. So yes, we think he played with the military bands, although for years and years he would say either he saved America in World War II or he saved America in the Korean War. He would often get confused which story he was telling, and every story he told was more bizarre than the one before. But he came out of the military, and again, we believe he was in a special group that played music as opposed to fighting. And but he got the break of his life with Tiny Grimes, who was a very well-known jazz musician. But jazz was on its way out, and rhythm and blues was transforming into, in the late 40s, rhythm and blues was transforming into rock and roll, and Tiny Grimes had to scramble to keep up. And he had this very wacky group called the Rockin' Highlanders, which did the famous Scottish, sorry, I take that back, the Scottish folk song, Loch Lomond, and they dress up as with kilts and tams and all that. So you got to visualize a group of African Americans in kilts and tams and plaids singing Loch Lomond, and that was the group that Tiny Grimes invited. He was Jealousy Hawkins at the time,
right?
To get his start. Plus, they would do all sorts of other outrageous things. So I think the first lesson that Screamin' Jay Hawkins learned was it didn't hurt to be outrageous.
Now, see, I remember him from the movie American Hot Wax. And by the way, if you want to see him in his full onstage persona, that is the movie to see him in, because he gets out of the limousine with a with a pygmy bone between his nose, bare-chested, holding his faithful Henry, and Henry was his skull on a stick, and but that's what I remember him by. But he had a special relationship with Alan Freed, didn't he?
Well, yeah. So Jealousy Hawkins, Screamin' Jay Hawkins, we'll call him, even though that was the name he made up for himself.
Right.
Was from Cleveland, and Alan Freed had been working his way through the Midwest. He was a talented DJ, and finally got his big break in Cleveland. So so when Screamin' Jay got out of the service, Alan Freed was in his prime in Cleveland, sort of helping invent rock and roll. Well, he didn't invent rock and roll; it was there, but he gave it a lot of publicity because he really had a late night show that focused solely on the R&B that would become rock and roll. That included the doo-wop, which was an African American offshoot of R&B, and he played all this late at night, and his audience was white. So white people would teenagers would listen to this very hip jive and all these great rhythm and blues songs, and that sort of was the beginning of rock and roll, you might say. And so Screamin' Jay comes back from the service. He comes home to Cleveland. He gets on his radio. He hears this jive-talking guy, and they're playing this great music. And he says, I'm going to go visit this guy. And he does. And Alan Freed was a nice guy, and he said, well, when you're famous, come see me again.
Now, did Alan Freed... Go ahead. Sorry.
He probably thought he would never see this cat again. But, 5 years later, there he is. Now, with a hot record.
Did Alan Freed give him the nickname Screamin'?
No, he gave it to himself. He had tried different names as he was working his way from band to band to band, and all his first recordings on very small labels. And don't forget, there were a lot of colorful names out there. There was Big Joe Turner, for example, who was very popular. So if you have a Big Joe Turner, hey, it's not a big leap to do a Screamin' Jay Hawkins.
That's right. That's totally true. And but he, like I said, he got his break in Cleveland along with Alan Freed. And
well, he didn't get his break in Cleveland, so he met Alan Freed, and then you can't say that Alan Freed invented rock and roll, but you might be able to say that Alan Freed invented the rock and roll concert, because now I don't remember the year it was now. I'm not looking at my book, but it was very early, around 50 or 51. He decides to throw a concert with a number of coming up rhythm and blues acts, including Tiny Grimes. And this concert, there were so many teenagers that wanted to come to this concert that it was a near riot situation, and only the first group got to sing one song, and then the police closed it all down for fear of a riot. So he invented the concert, but it never happened because the police closed it down. There were so many kids that wanted to come to see this. So Alan Freed later went on to be a big disc jockey in New York, and for years he would have concerts in New York and he used the same lineup. He would say, okay, here's 10 acts, one right after another, and teenagers at the time would flock to see these shows.
No,
but anyway, skip forward from Cleveland when Alan Freed's in New York, and there's Screamin' Jay, who suddenly has it's kind of a hit record, and I say kind of because I Put a Spell on You was sung with a very weird, ghoulish noises from Screamin' Jay, and this is what made the song. It was not just an interesting song, but he put this personal, ghoulish touch on it, and he had all these gasps and noises and grunts that he would do with the song, and people thought this is obscene, and a lot of stations wouldn't play the song. But Alan Freed was going to put him on one of his shows, and he suggested to Screamin' Jay, why don't you do your song but come out of a coffin? And Screamin' Jay, there's no way I'm coming out of a coffin. And they discussed it a little bit, and Alan Freed starts whipping out $100 bills or whatever. And when he gets to a good number, probably they say it was about $300. Screamin' Jay says, "Okay, I'm coming out of a coffin," and then that's what he did. Coffin opens up, Screamin' Jay comes out, and he launches "I Put a Spell on You," and that was his act for the next 50 years.
Now, I Put a Spell on You, obviously his most famous song, not his only hit, but that's his most famous song, and you say he doesn't even remember recording it.
Well, yeah. When he went to record the song, well, the first time he recorded this song, it was a ballad, sort of romantic. He didn't have the grunts and groans. He didn't have all that nonsense. It was a straight ballad. And then he gets a break, and it's time to do another recording, and it's not going well. And the producer brings in dinner, fried chicken, and lots of booze, because he wants Screamin' Jay and his band, and he had a very good band backing up, all professional guys. Mickey Baker of later on of Mickey and Sylvia fame. All these great sessions museum. They all come together. They're having a party. They're drinking. They're eating dinner. They're drinking like fish. They could barely stand up, and then they just launch into this crazy "I Put a Spell on You" with Screamin' Jay's grunts and groans, and Screamin' Jay pretty much says by the end of the recording session, not a man was standing.
How much fun was it for you to write this book? Because it sounds like you had a ball researching his life.
Well, it was, let me say, so the way I got to write this book, I had written a book about Johnny Ace, a 1950s singer. He was the most popular R&B act in the early 50s, and then the story goes that he committed suicide playing Russian roulette. So, but then I met online this guy named Mike Armando, because he kept talking about Johnny Ace, and it turned out Johnny Ace was a bandmate of his, not the famous Johnny Ace from the 1950s. But we became friends online, and he said, you really should do a story on Screamin' Jay Hawkins. And I tell you that because I was part of his backup band in the 1970s. And I said, Mike, I don't know, because I didn't know anything about Screamin' Jay other than the song. But I eventually came around, and I said I'd do I'd try and do a book about it. I didn't know how far it would go. But the more I got into it, the more fun it became. And there were a lot of people out there who remembered Screamin' Jay, who sang with him, or were in his band, or Screamin' Jay screwed over, because Screamin' Jay generally screwed over almost everybody. So it was a lot. It was a lot of fun, and from really zero knowledge about him to being able to put a book. It was really, I can't say it was a labor of love. It was just fun.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun reading it. And one of the things that struck me now, he told everybody his own version of the truth, what he remembered the truth being at that moment, I guess. But
yeah, that's true.
But how many kids did he really have? I mean, you said you found his daughter, and she's mentioned at length in the book.
Yeah, so there was a woman, I think it was in the 80s, who decided to find out how many kids Screamin' Jay had, and she actually did. There was a British documentary on this, and they started out. They went to 55 children, then they went to 85 children, and this woman decided to have a get together of everybody who said they were Screamin' Jay's child, and they got together, and there was maybe 5 or 6 people.
Oh, well, okay.
And so then I looked at his marriages, because he was always married.
Mm-hmm.
He always needed a woman at his side. And and one marriage during the height of his playing lasted for about 20 years. And she knew her husband well. She barely let him out of her sight.
Oh.
So there was a 20-year period where she was pretty close to him. Not to say he probably didn't have gigs elsewhere and screwed around.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time I was figuring it out and looked, and I said, probably at the most, he could have had 15 kids.
Which still isn't bad.
It was still a lot.
Yeah.
But it's not 85.
Right. Not the numbers that were being passed around. So, but
right. So, and he didn't have any children with the woman he was married to for all that period of time, nor did he have any children with any of the women. I got to think if this is true now, that he married afterwards. He only had children, 3 with his first wife, just 3 with his first wife, and none with his wives after that. But he played around an awful lot, no doubt.
And
so you figure some of those women might have gotten pregnant.
Yeah.
But it's doubtful it was 85 or 55 or any of those crazy numbers.
You wouldn't have time. Yeah, I mean, it's like...
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, he had to make a living, he had to be on the road all the time. Otherwise, he wasn't getting any money, because after I Put a Spell on You, his records didn't sell.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how many albums he cut or records he cut, they just didn't sell well enough for him to have income. So he had to be on the road, and he had to do the shows. He had to go back on the road, go to the next show. I know it's in between. He might have screwed around with some women, but he was a busy guy, just doing what he had to do.
Yes, he had to make a living, and so. But still, 15 kids is not bad. But your book does attempt to clear up some of the things that he says that maybe he said tongue in cheek or he embellished a bit. So and that made the book fun to read. Let me ask you this: you got anything else coming down the pike?
Yeah, I have. So this book officially comes out around July 1st. And then I just, I'll get the contract Monday. I'm doing a book with the Dixie Cups. Now, you might remember the Dixie Cups girl groups from the early 60s, Chapel of Love, People Say, Iko, Iko, those songs.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So this is, I've been working on, over the past 2 years, 3 books from the girl group era. I was working with Beverly Lee of the Shirelles.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And she was, and I helped her with her memoir. And that could have been published now, but she's turned down the publishers. So, but it's still out there, ready to go. And then and just by pure accident, I came across a woman. She actually contacted me on Facebook. Her name was Murray. Can't think of her first name. Louise Murray, who I didn't know. She contacted me, and she was in the very, very first girl group in 1955, the first female doo-wop group called The Hearts, and they had a song called Lonely Night. And then in the early 60s, she was with the Janettes, who had a song called Sally Go Around the Rosie. Sally Go Around the Roses, sorry. Mm-hmm. And I helped her with her book because she had an awful, awful life. But I'm still reworking that book because it's a tough book. If you read it, you can't believe this woman survived.
Wow.
So I've been working on 3 books from the girl group era, but the next one to go looks like it'll be the Dixie Cups.
Fantastic. Well, I hope will you come back on the show when that one comes out?
I surely will. This was a lot of fun, Jim.
Well, I thank you a lot. It was a lot of fun for me also. Let me go ahead and get your name. Again, it's Steve Bergsman, and the book is I Put a Spell on You, The Bizarre Life of Screamin' Jay Hawkins. It's published by Feral House, and after July 1, it'll be on sale wherever books are sold. So thank you again, Steve. I appreciate it.
Okay, have a good evening.
Thank you. You too. This has been the Junot Files. I'm Jim Junot, and remember, as always, if you like what you've heard, please click subscribe. Until next time, that's the Junot Files.